In March 1925, the United States witnessed an event so violent, so incomprehensible, that it permanently changed how humanity looked at the sky. It began as an ordinary morning in America's Midwest. Within a few hours, entire towns were erased. Nearly 700 lives were gone. The landscape of 3 states had been torn apart. This was the tri-state tornado, the longest, the fastest, and the most lethal tornado ever recorded on the North American continent. In the early 20th century, America was a nation moving forward with confidence. The First World War was behind it. Industry was booming. The promise of modern science seemed limitless. People believed that progress could protect them from the chaos of nature. But on March 18, 1925, nature reminded them how fragile that belief truly was. That morning, the towns scattered across southern Missouri lay under a gray but peaceful sky. Farmers were in their fields. The clatter of trains echoed in the valleys, and children walked to one-room schoolhouses, carrying tin lunch pails. The air was unusually warm for March, but no one gave it much thought. By noon, the barometers in a few post offices began to fall, yet the Weather Bureau issued no warning. In those days, the very word tornado was forbidden from public forecasts. Officials feared that saying it aloud would cause panic. And so, silence reigned. Near the small town of Ellington, Missouri, a rotating column of air touched the ground. It was narrow at first, a dark finger twisting under a heavy cloud base. Within minutes, it began to grow, pulling energy from the collision of warm Gulf moisture and cold Canadian air high above. The rotation tightened, accelerated, and widened, until it became an immense black funnel stretching from sky to earth. What had been a simple spring storm evolved into a force unlike anything modern meteorology had ever measured. Eyewitnesses later said the tornado did not look like a typical funnel. It appeared as a wall, a moving cliff of soot-colored debris, 1.5 kilometers wide, racing across the ground. Wind speeds are estimated today between 260 and 320 miles per hour, strong enough to lift locomotives off their rails, to drive wooden beams through trees as if they were spears, to pull the air itself from people's lungs. It advanced northeastward at roughly 60 miles per hour, faster than most cars could travel on the rural roads of 1925. That meant the storm could overtake entire towns before anyone even saw it coming. The first to suffer was Annapolis, a small community nestled among the hills of southeastern Missouri. The hills that had always sheltered its people now hid their doom. The tornado struck just after midday. The sky turned a metallic green. Animals screamed. The roar of wind drowned every other sound. In less than 5 minutes, 90% of Annapolis was gone. Houses were splintered into fragments no larger than matchsticks. 4 people were dead. Hundreds stood amid the wreckage, staring at a landscape they no longer recognized. The storm moved on, gaining energy as it went. Crossing the Mississippi River, it entered Illinois, a broad, flat plain where nothing could slow it down. In its path lay Murfreesboro, a busy industrial city of 15,000. At 2:30 p.m., without warning, the western horizon turned black. Factory workers stepped outside to look. Many never returned. The tornado hit with the fury of a bomb. Steel beams twisted like ribbon. Smokestacks toppled. Entire trains were flipped from the tracks. When the wind finally passed, Murfreesboro no longer existed as a functioning city. 234 people lay dead, the highest toll ever recorded in a single American community from one tornado. 15,000 homes were destroyed. Survivors spoke of fire breaking out from ruptured gas lines, of mothers searching the ruins for children, of a silence afterward. That was worse than the noise. Among the survivors was a young girl named Betty Maroney. Decades later, she would recall that the air seemed to vanish just before the tornado hit, as if the world took a deep breath and never exhaled. She was thrown unconscious. When she awoke, her house was gone. Her father and 3 siblings were dead, crushed beneath the wreckage of their school, where 33 children had perished. For weeks afterward, volunteers found bodies miles from where they had lived, carried away by wind and rain. To the southeast, the town of DeSoto met the same fate. Every church, every shop, every public building collapsed. In nearby Gorham, Illinois, the tornado left not one standing structure. Survivors described a rain of debris so dense that daylight disappeared. One student later said the classroom floor rose like a wave and swallowed us. Teachers tried to shield the children. Most died where they fell. Entire families simply ceased to exist. By the time the storm reached Indiana, it had traveled more than 200 miles. In Owensville, a reporter wrote that the body of an unknown child was found in a creek, carried there by the wind. The tornado continued toward Princeton, before finally dissipating into the gray evening sky. After 3.5 hours of continuous destruction, when it was over, the path of devastation stretched 3 states, 219 miles long and a mile wide, a record that still stands a century later. In total, 695 people were killed and more than 2,000 injured. Tens of thousands lost their homes. Entire communities were wiped from maps. The economic losses. About $16.5 million in 1925 would equal nearly $3 billion today. But statistics cannot convey what the survivors saw. The smell of splintered pine and smoke, the taste of dust, the eerie silence, where birds no longer sang. Scientists who later examined the data called it a phenomenon beyond precedent. How could a single tornado remain on the ground for so long and move with such relentless speed? The answer lay in the atmosphere itself. On that day, 3 massive air systems collided over the Midwest, a low-pressure center pushing east from Arkansas, a surge of warm, humid air flowing north from the Gulf of Mexico, and a dome of cold, dry air sliding down from Canada. The collision created a gigantic rotating thunderstorm, a supercell with perfect conditions for a long-track F5 tornado. The landscape offered no obstacles. Flat farmland, open plains, nothing to slow the vortex once it formed. Yet the tragedy was amplified by human ignorance. Meteorology in 1925 was a young science. Radar did not exist. Weather balloons were primitive. Forecasts relied on scattered observations telegraphed from town to town. And, perhaps most fatally, public officials insisted on silence. The Weather Bureau's policy banned the use of the word tornado in any official statement. They feared that warnings would spread hysteria. Instead, their silence condemned hundreds who might have sought shelter, had they known what was coming. The people of Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana went about their day, unaware that the air above them was about to turn deadly. When the tri-state tornado struck, it did more than destroy. It exposed the limits of early 20th century science. The disaster forced the United States to confront an uncomfortable truth. Progress means nothing if it refuses to speak the truth aloud. Out of the ruins came change. Researchers began to collect eyewitness reports and meteorological records. In the decades that followed, the government established a network of observation stations and radar installations. The phrase tornado warning entered the nation's vocabulary, and the culture of silence was broken. Even so, the legacy of 1925 still echoes. Every spring, as cold air meets warm over the Central Plains, Americans look nervously at the horizon. Modern satellites can track supercells. Doppler radar can measure rotation inside a cloud. Yet the formation of a tornado remains partly unpredictable. Scientists understand the ingredients, but not the exact recipe. The tri-state storm remains a mystery, a reminder that even in the age of data, the atmosphere keeps its secrets. The event also changed how Americans perceived nature. Until then, many believed that civilization could insulate them from the wild. The tornado proved otherwise. It showed that technology can fail, that human structures, both physical and intellectual, are fragile before the elemental forces of wind and heat. It reminded the nation that respect for nature is not superstition, but survival. Nearly a century later, other tornadoes have struck with terrifying power. The 2011 Joplin tornado, the 2013 Moore tornado, the 2021 Kentucky outbreak. None, however, have equaled the tri-state tornado's combination of strength, speed, and longevity. It remains the benchmark by which all others are measured. Meteorologists still study it, feeding historical data into computer models, trying to understand how such an event could persist for 3.5 hours without dissipating. Some suggest that it may not have been a single tornado, but a continuous family of overlapping twisters, merging along one path, a chain of storms appearing as one continuous monster. Others believe the unique geography of the region funneled the winds, sustaining the vortex far longer than usual. No explanation is complete. Perhaps that uncertainty is what keeps the story alive. Beyond the science, the human stories endure. Letters were found hundreds of miles from where they were written, carried on the wind. A plank of wood, 12 inches feet, was driven deep into a maple tree, where it remains preserved in a county museum. Photographs recovered from the debris show entire neighborhoods reduced to gray powder. Survivors built temporary shelters from railroad ties and canvas, living among ruins through that bitter spring. Charity trains brought food and medicine. Volunteers came from as far as Chicago. The newspapers called it the day the wind killed the heartland. Out of tragedy came resilience. Towns rebuilt, families adapted, children grew up with a new respect for the sky. The disaster helped push forward research that would later save tens of thousands of lives. And yet, despite every advance, the fundamental lesson remains. Nature is not an enemy to be defeated, but a force to be understood. Today, with climate change altering weather patterns across the globe, scientists see warning signs reminiscent of the past. Warmer air holds more moisture. Contrasting air masses create greater instability. The same conditions that birthed the 1925 tornado could under modern circumstances, reappear more often. In recent years, tornadoes have struck areas once considered immune: the Carolinas, the Northeast, even parts of Europe and Asia. Humanity's expanding footprint means more people live in harm's way. The tri-state tornado is no longer just a chapter in history. It is a prophecy of what unchecked atmospheric imbalance might bring. For the people of the Midwest, memory is part of identity. In Murfreesboro, a stone monument lists the names of the dead. Every March, residents gather to read them aloud. In local schools, children learn about the day their ancestors faced the sky and lost. It is not morbid remembrance. It is gratitude for the warnings, the radar screens, the sirens that now protect them, born from the sacrifice of those who had none. Looking back, the tri-state tornado stands as both catastrophe and teacher. It taught that science must communicate, that silence kills, that humility before nature is wisdom, not weakness. It revealed the thin line between civilization and chaos, drawn only by air and chance. Nearly 100 years later, the land has healed. Cornfields cover the scars. New houses stand where debris once lay. But when storm clouds gather, and the wind begins to howl across Missouri and Illinois, the past stirs again in collective memory. Old men on porches glance at the sky. Young meteorologists check their instruments twice. And somewhere, deep in the American heartland, an unspoken thought runs through every mind. Remember 1925, because sometimes it takes only the breath of the earth to remind us how small we are. And sometimes, a single gust of wind can rewrite the story of an entire nation. If such a storm were to strike again today, in an age of satellites, smartphones, and artificial intelligence, would we truly be prepared? Would we trust the warnings? Or would we, like those before us, look up at a darkening sky and tell ourselves that nothing so terrible could ever happen again? History suggests otherwise. The atmosphere does not remember, but it does repeat. And when it does, the only defense humanity will ever have is knowledge, humility, and the courage to listen when the wind begins to speak.